He was just 9 years old, flying alone in first class with nothing but a sketch pad and dreams of building a better world. But when a white passenger screamed, "He stole my phone," the cabin erupted in chaos. Phones raised, whispers of "call the cops," and all eyes pinned on Elijah Reed. How could a child genius, on his way to an innovation summit, become the target of fear and prejudice in midair? What invisible wall divides us so completely that even a 9-year-old must prove his worth? In the next chapters, we'll witness how one man's injustice unleashed a chain of events powerful enough to ground flights, ignite a national conversation, and ultimately build bridges both literal and metaphorical. Are you ready to question everything you thought you knew about innocence, power, and redemption? Hit that like button. Share this video, and subscribe now to join us as we unfold the story of Elijah Reed, where fear met empathy and justice soared above prejudice. The voice came out of nowhere, cutting through the hum of the airplane cabin like a blade. "He doesn't belong here. Get him out of this section right now." Heads turned. A woman's voice, sharp and commanding, echoed through the first-class cabin. Some passengers flinched, others pulled out their phones and hit record. A black boy sat silently in seat 2A. His eyes were wide, not in anger, but in a kind of stunned disbelief. He wasn't moving, just sitting there with his hands folded in his lap, his backpack tucked neatly under the seat. I said, "Remove him. This is first class, not some daycare." More murmurs erupted. A man 2 rows back leaned into the aisle to get a better look. Someone gasped audibly. A child, alone, surrounded by adults, and now the center of a storm he never saw coming. One flight attendant rushed forward, her voice cracking as she tried to calm things down. "Ma'am, please, lower your voice. There are other passengers on board." The woman didn't flinch. She turned to the flight attendant, jabbing a finger in the air. "Don't tell me to lower my voice. That boy's in the wrong seat. He's lying about his ticket, and I will not sit here while we let this happen." The boy's lips quivered. "I didn't do anything," he said softly. It was barely above a whisper, but somehow everyone heard it. A man in business casual leaned toward the aisle and barked, "Somebody call security. This is serious. What's he even doing up here?" Someone behind him already had. There were murmurs of "Get the police ready when we land," and this is what's wrong with things these days. But amid the chaos, the boy didn't cry. He blinked, slowly. His chest rose and fell in shallow, controlled breaths. There was a calm about him, not because he wasn't afraid, but because he had learned too early how to carry fear quietly. He clutched the edge of his sketchpad tightly. Not a toy, not a phone, just a white paper sketchbook filled with drawings. At the top of the page, in pencil, were architectural blueprints, details so intricate they looked professional. And that's when the flight intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to a developing situation on board, we will be making an emergency landing at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. Please remain in your seats." Gasps swept the cabin like a wave. Emergency landing. That was when everyone started to panic for real. Voices rose louder. A woman near the window began praying under her breath. The man in the middle seat looked visibly excited, like he'd just been cast as an extra in a real-life courtroom drama. But the boy just sat still, trembling slightly. The flight attendant leaned down beside him, her voice now lower, softer, but still tense. "Sweetheart, what's your name?" He blinked. "Elijah," he said. "Elijah Reed." She nodded slowly. She was trying to be kind, but even kindness, when it's unsure, can cut. "Okay, Elijah, just stay calm. We're going to figure this out." He looked up at her, and for the first time since the shouting started, a single tear rolled down his cheek. Why is this happening to me? No one had an answer. Outside the aircraft, no one knew that inside seat 2A sat a boy who didn't just love design, he lived it. He had won a statewide youth architecture competition at only 9 years old. He was flying alone for the first time, heading to the Youth Innovation Summit in Chicago. His father had proudly bought him a first-class ticket, not because they needed to flaunt anything, but because he wanted his son to feel, even for once, that the world saw his worth. But the world didn't. Not right now. Right now, the world saw a threat. The woman who had made the accusation, Dana Mulroney, adjusted her cardigan, her voice now dripping with performative concern. "I don't want to escalate anything, but I'm just saying if we're going to talk about safety and protocol, this needs to be investigated." A young woman across the aisle turned off her music and narrowed her eyes. "You mean because he's black?" Dana looked offended. "Excuse me, I don't care about that. I'm talking about a potential security risk." He was fidgeting with wires. "What if he's hiding something?" Elijah's head snapped toward her. "No, I wasn't," he said. "I was sketching." Dana waved a dismissive hand. "Whatever it was, I saw what I saw. And if you all don't care about keeping this flight safe, then I will make sure someone does." That was when Elijah looked around. Dozens of eyes, some glaring, some blank, a few compassionate, but too afraid to speak. His stomach twisted. He felt small, invisible, targeted. His breathing got shallow. He held his sketchbook to his chest like it was a shield. And that's when the older man across the aisle in khakis and a Harvard Law sweatshirt said coldly, "We need to hold people accountable. First class is earned." The implication was clear. Elijah didn't belong. The flight attendant stepped back, her eyes flicking between the growing chaos and the captain's locked cockpit door. From the rear of the plane, a second flight attendant radioed in. "They're sending airport officers. ETA 5 minutes after touchdown." The words stung. 5 minutes, that's all. 5 minutes before this child would be pulled off a plane like a criminal. 5 minutes before everything would spiral into something far bigger than anyone realized. 5 minutes before the woman who made the accusation, Dana Mulroney, would realize she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Because in exactly 5 minutes, that boy's father would arrive, and the entire cabin was about to find out who Elijah Reed really was. 3 hours earlier, the world had felt quiet, calm, normal. Elijah Reed sat in the lounge chair of Terminal 6A at LAX with his backpack on his lap and a pencil tucked behind his ear. His tablet was open on his knees, but he wasn't watching cartoons. He was drawing, not with flashy digital paint strokes or filters. Elijah was sketching clean, straight architectural lines, a minimalist 2-story school building shaped like a spiral, with solar-paneled rooftops and green corridors shaped like loops. On the side of the screen, small annotations in tiny, neat handwriting read, "Curved ceilings for optimal airflow and west-facing glass for light capture." A woman walking by glanced over his shoulder, slowed down for half a second, then smiled. She leaned over and said gently, "Is that for school?" Elijah didn't look up. He nodded. "Looks amazing, kid," she added, then walked off before he had a chance to say thank you. Elijah didn't mind. He wasn't used to people stopping for long. He had learned to appreciate moments of quiet praise without expecting them to stay. Across the terminal, a voice on the intercom called passengers for Flight 218 to Chicago. Please proceed to Gate 34 for early boarding. Elijah stood up, checked his watch, then checked again, as if it might change. He adjusted his blazer. It wasn't stiff or oversized. It was navy blue, with subtle pinstripes and a soft inner lining. His father had insisted on tailoring it just for this trip, not because they cared what people thought, but because, as his dad said, sometimes you dress the part not for them but for you, so you remember who you are. He whispered those words to himself as he walked toward the gate. Boarding had just begun when he reached the counter. The gate agent, a cheerful woman with silver streaks in her bun, looked at his ticket and smiled. "Mr. Elijah Reed," she said, with the kind of tone that treats children like they matter. "You're in seat 2A today. First class. Lucky guy." He nodded politely. "Thank you. And traveling alone?" "Yes, ma'am. Got your papers?" He pulled out the folder from his backpack, inside a notarized letter from his father, his ID card, and an emergency contact sheet. The woman glanced over it quickly. "Everything looks great. You're all set. Enjoy the flight, sweetheart." Elijah stepped through the gate and down the jet bridge. He liked the silence there, the soft rumble of machinery and the smell of fresh air trapped between aluminum and exhaust. His fingers brushed the smooth wall as he walked. As he entered the aircraft, the front cabin felt warm and dim. Plush leather seats, faint jazz music playing over the cabin speakers. The lights glowed in amber tones. "Welcome aboard," a voice said. The flight attendant near the entry door smiled. She had dark curls pinned back under her navy cap and a slightly tired look in her eyes. "You must be Mr. Reed. You're in 2A. That's just to your left." He gave a quick nod and settled into the wide window seat. He looked out, watched a luggage cart roll past in the distance. Then he pulled out his sketch pad and got back to work. Somewhere between tracing the railing of his spiral corridor and outlining the glass dome atrium, Elijah heard another set of heels approaching. Dana Mulroney. She wasn't angry yet, not loud, just watching. She paused when she saw him, then gave a tight smile. The kind that's all teeth and no warmth. "I think you may be in the wrong seat, sweetheart." Elijah looked up from his sketch pad. "I'm in 2A, he said. His voice was calm, clear. He didn't flinch. She smiled wider. "No, you must have made a mistake. That's my seat." Elijah blinked. He turned his boarding pass toward her, not with attitude, but with the precision of someone used to defending truth with facts. Dana glanced at it, her expression unreadable. "That's strange," she murmured. The flight attendant returned, her smile polite but firm. "Ms. Mulroney, your seat is 3C. Dana turned sharply. 3C? That doesn't make any sense. I specifically requested a forward window." "I understand," the attendant said, "but your boarding pass confirms 3C. Dana hesitated, then looked back at Elijah. "Well, maybe there was a system glitch." Elijah didn't say anything. Dana muttered under her breath as she lifted her carry-on into the overhead bin. Her elbow clipped Elijah's sketchbook as she passed, but she didn't notice or pretended not to. He readjusted the pages. "Ms. Mulroney," the attendant said kindly. "Can I get you anything to drink before takeoff? Sparkling water," Dana said, sinking into her seat with a heavy sigh. Elijah resumed sketching, but he could feel her eyes still on him. Her gaze was calculating, dissecting. He knew that look. He'd seen it in school, in grocery stores, even at church sometimes. It wasn't confusion. It was disbelief. The kind that asks, silently, "How did you get here?" 10 minutes passed. The rest of first class filled in. Then the doors closed, the cabin dimmed, seat belts clicked, the safety briefing began. Elijah put his sketchbook down and stared out the window as the plane rolled toward the runway. Outside, sunlight flickered across the tarmac. A long line of planes in the distance were waiting for takeoff. The sky was cloudless, everything looked peaceful, but Elijah's chest tightened. Not from fear of flying. He loved flying. It was the silence behind him. That sharp, cold silence from the woman in 3C. He didn't understand why she looked at him like that, why she kept whispering into her phone. He tried to shake it off, tried to focus on his design, tried to remember his dad's words, but something in his gut told him this flight wasn't going to be peaceful for long, not with her behind him, not with that look in her eyes, and not in a world where even a child could be seen as a threat simply for being where he was supposed to be. The plane had been in the air for just under 30 minutes when the tension began to grow roots. At first, it was subtle, a glance too long, a whisper that hung in the air just a beat too long. But for Elijah, who had learned to read people like books, it was unmistakable. Dana Mulroney hadn't stopped watching him. Every time he reached into his backpack, her eyes followed. When he shifted in his seat to look out the window, she leaned slightly forward, like she expected him to pull out something suspicious. Her fingers rested tightly on the armrests, the knuckles pale. Elijah tried to ignore it. He tapped his pencil against his sketch pad, outlining a sunlit hallway connecting two wings of his design. He wrote a note in the margin. Curved roofing, reduce echo and absorb ambient noise. Noise. There was too much of it now. Not from passengers, but from her. Her energy filled the row like smoke. Dana leaned over the seat in front of her, toward the flight attendant as she walked by. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low but deliberate. "I don't mean to be difficult, but I really do think there's been some sort of mistake." Mia, the flight attendant, paused and leaned closer. "Mistake in what way?" Ma'am Dana nodded slightly toward Elijah without fully pointing. "That child, the one in 2A. Are you absolutely sure his ticket is valid?" Maya straightened. "Yes, ma'am. I personally scanned his boarding pass. It's a first-class seat, fully confirmed." Dana gave a thin smile, the kind that said she didn't accept that answer. "I understand that's what your scanner told you, but I've worked in corporate travel for over 20 years. Sometimes these systems glitch." Or, she lowered her voice, "people game the system." Mia blinked. Dana continued, her tone softening into something feigned polite. "I mean, think about it. A kid, traveling alone, in first class. Doesn't that strike you as unusual?" Maya pressed her lips together. "No more unusual than a first-class seat held by someone with a travel voucher, or someone retired, or someone your age flying alone." Dana's eyebrows twitched. "I'm just concerned. I mean, you know how things are these days. Better to be cautious. I noticed him fidgeting with his backpack a lot. Kept pulling things out. Electronics, I think." She paused to let that implication linger. Mia stood silently for a second. Her training told her to diffuse, de-escalate. She nodded once. "Thank you for bringing it up. We'll make sure everything stays secure." Then she walked away. Dana leaned back in her seat and exhaled sharply, satisfied. Elijah heard most of it. He tried not to, but the air on a plane carries words in strange ways. He felt it in his chest. He flipped the page in his sketch pad but didn't draw anything. His fingers hovered over the paper. Why did she keep talking about him? Why was she trying to make it seem like he didn't belong? He thought about telling Mia what he heard, but something inside him said not to. Not yet. Not when the facts were still on his side. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out his tablet. On the lock screen, a picture of him and his dad fishing in Big Bear Lake filled the display. He smiled just a little, then unlocked it. He opened his digital folder labeled Summit Final Presentation. Inside were 10 detailed architectural models he had built using a combination of AI rendering tools and 3D software. Projects designed for public libraries, urban playgrounds, and mobile disaster shelters. Every file meticulously labeled. He opened the first one, a concept for a modular STEM classroom built from recycled shipping containers. It made him feel grounded again. It reminded him that he belonged somewhere, even if this cabin was trying to convince him otherwise. Another 30 minutes passed. Mia walked by again. Dana flagged her down with a gentle wave. "Sorry to bother again," she said sweetly. "I just want to report that I think the boy in 2A might be using unauthorized electronics. He's been fidgeting constantly with something that looks like a device. It could interfere with the aircraft systems. You should check it." Mia's patience wavered. "He's working on a tablet, the same way half the cabin is." Dana forced a chuckle. "Well, maybe I'm just paranoid, but you never know. These days, kids know how to do things, hack things." Mia stiffened. Her voice came out firmer. "Ma'am, unless you have something concrete to report, I'd appreciate if you let the crew manage safety protocols." Dana frowned. "I'm just saying, if something happens and you didn't act, how will that look?" Mia didn't respond this time. She walked away, clearly irritated. Dana leaned back again, lips tightening. She pulled out her phone and began texting, 3 rows back. A man in a blazer looked over at Elijah, then down at his tablet. He leaned toward the aisle and whispered something to the woman next to him. She nodded. It was spreading, not the truth, but suspicion. Suspicion moves faster than facts. Elijah didn't need to hear it to feel it. He could feel the air shifting. The cabin felt colder now, smaller. He looked down at his tablet again but didn't see the building. He saw Dana's face floating in his memory, her eyes, her voice, her disbelief. He felt a lump form in his throat. He swallowed hard and closed his eyes. His father's voice echoed in his mind. "If they stare, let them. But don't shrink. You've already earned your place." He reopened the tablet, went back to his design, forced himself to draw one more line, but he wasn't sure how much longer he could hold on to calm, because no matter how carefully you draw your future, someone always seems to want to erase it. And Dana Mulroney had just begun sharpening her pencil. Elijah Reed felt the eyes everywhere now. Each flick of a glance felt like a small jolt, a silent accusation, a question written on invisible walls. Why is he here? He tried to focus on the soft hum of the engines above his head. He tried to listen to the gentle whoosh of air vents, but he could still hear the words drifting from behind him. It just doesn't make sense. A woman's voice, low enough to seem private. First class is for people who earn it. And a 9-year-old traveling alone said a man, voice oily and dismissive. Who would do that? A small cough escaped Elijah's throat. He looked down at his sketch pad, but his pencil trembled. The lines wavered. He wiped his hand on his pants and tried again. He sketched a floor plan of a community center. In his notes, he wrote the word open concept. He drew curved hallways. He imagined children running freely in the corridors. But, in his mind, the hallway felt narrower, like walls closing in. Mia Sanchez walked by again with her beverage cart. She caught his eye and offered a sympathetic smile. She paused. "How are you doing?" "Buddy." Elijah forced a small smile back. "Okay." She studied him for a moment, as if she might say something to defend him, but she only nodded and moved on. That was all she could do for now. Dana Mulroney was seated just behind Mia's path. As Mia rolled away, Dana called out, "Excuse me, Miss Sanchez." Mia stopped and turned. "Yes." Ma'am Dana's eyes sparkled with false concern. "I just want to make sure this is resolved before we land. If there is any problem, I don't want any surprises." Mia nodded. "I understand," Dana continued quietly. "You know what they say about first class being elite. We pay a premium. We expect a certain level of clientele." Mia blanched but managed a polite tone. "We appreciate your understanding while we verify everything." Dana nodded once, satisfied. Then leaned back. She crossed her legs, the heels of her shoes pressed against the carpet. She glanced at Elijah and raised an eyebrow. Elijah shut his sketch pad. He didn't dare even open it again. A voice in his head repeated 4 words. "People expect you to prove." He closed his eyes and counted to 10. 1, 2. He remembered the day his project won the statewide competition. His hands shook as the judge handed him the trophy. His dad had lifted him up, spun him around. Pride, pure pride. No whispers, no second guesses. But this moment was different. This moment stung. 3, 4. He clenched his fists in his lap. The leather seat felt soft. Too soft. He wanted something steady, something solid. 5. He opened his eyes and looked at the window. Clouds drifted by, white and soft. He imagined stepping onto one, imagined walking on it like solid ground. But clouds weren't real, not like his designs, not like his confidence. 6. He looked back at Dana. She was scrolling on her phone, possibly posting her version of events, possibly texting someone in authority. 7. He shifted again, trying to find comfort, but his backpack felt heavy, even heavier than before. He slid a hand inside and found his tablet. He rested his fingers on its cool edge. He closed his eyes again, breathed in and out. 8. He remembered his dad's voice. "Trust the work you've done. Trust the path you've built." 9. He opened his eyes. The cabin had tilted slightly. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seat belts. Seat belt click noises all around." The overhead sign glowed red. Elijah clicked his belt into place. The turbulence was mild, just a few bumps, but in his chest it felt like a seismic shift. The man behind him leaned forward and tapped his shoulder. "Kid, you better have a good explanation, because if you don't, they're not going to let you off easy." Elijah turned around, saw the man's face up close. His expression was stern, expectant, accusatory. I'm just going to Chicago for a conference," Elijah said softly. "Conference?" That was his truth. A youth innovation summit, a place where his designs could shine. A safe place. The man snorted. Sure you are. You tech prodigies are good talkers. He tapped his phone. They'll want to see that certificate now. Elijah swallowed hard. He didn't want to argue. He didn't want to be a spectacle. His voice trembled. I have it. On my tablet. The man's face twisted into a smirk. Tablet. Huh. Let's see it then. Elijah closed his eyes for a second and then unlocked his tablet. He brought up the PDF confirmation of his acceptance to the summit. He scrolled to the official letter, complete with school seals, signatures, and embossed stamps. He turned it toward the aisle, but the man reached forward and stopped him. You don't shove it in my face. He turned to his wife. See, he's so defensive. The wife shook her head. Just open it, she said quietly. We need to know. The man let go with a glare, and Elijah took a shaky breath. He tapped to enlarge the document. It filled the screen. A letter addressed to him, his name, his award, the summit details. He handed it out again. The wife leaned forward and read. Her eyes widened. He's legit, she whispered. The man's tongue clicked. Fine. He leaned back. But let's not pretend. This could still be a stolen account. Elijah closed the file and locked his tablet. His hands shook. He whispered to himself, This isn't happening. This wasn't supposed to happen. He closed his eyes. He pictured his father's face. The pride in his father's eyes when he saw Elijah's model at home. That warmth in his voice. And then he breathed. He opened his eyes again. He looked at the drop of sunlight twisting on the window pane, a single beam illuminating his sketch pad on the seat next to him. He slid the sketch pad toward himself. Under the beam, the pencil lines glowed a little brighter. 10 minutes of escalating tension had just passed. But Elijah held on to one thing, his work, his proof, his art. He placed his fingers on the page and reminded himself, a design is only as strong as its foundation. And as long as he stayed true to his foundations, nothing could break him. Not the doubts of strangers, not harsh whispers behind him, not even their microaggressions. The plane hummed on. Clouds drifted by. Elijah reached for his pencil and prepared to draw again. Elijah Reed sat with his sketch pad resting on his knees, pencil poised. Around him the cabin hummed with the soft din of conversation and the occasional clink of glassware. The turbulence had eased, but the atmosphere still felt charged, as if everyone were holding their breath. Dana Mulroney shifted in her seat directly behind him. She reached down into her tote bag and pretended to search for a pen. Her elbow bumped Elijah's backpack. He glanced over his shoulder, saw her frown as she fished around. She pulled out a sleek black phone and held it up. "That's my work phone," she said to herself, voice just under her breath. Why is it not in my hand? Elijah's heart skipped. He had not moved. He had not touched her belongings. Yet he felt the accusatory weight in the air. Dana kept her eyes on the phone as though it might vanish. Then she slipped it into her lap and closed her eyes, pretending to rest. Elijah dared a quick look at the seat pocket in front of him. He saw the edge of a phone case poking out of her open tote on the floor. It was different from the phone she held. Dana muttered into her sleeve. Eyes closed. She was acting. And he knew it. The flight attendant, Mia Sanchez, passed by with a trolley, offering beverages. Passengers ordered wine, soda, coffee. Dana accepted a sparkling water, but kept her gaze fixed on Elijah's seat. He sipped his juice and tried to focus on drawing the archway at the entrance of the community center concept. But every time he looked down, he felt her eyes. He heard her brain ticking, plotting. A few rows back, two men in suits were checking their devices, exchanging looks with nods. They had Dana's tone of voice, the kind that said they were ready to believe the worst. A faint ding sounded as the plane's Wi-Fi network announced new messages. Dana checked her phone, frowned, and looked around as though expecting confirmation that her work phone had reappeared. When it didn't, she shifted her weight and bent down. Elijah heard the rustle of fabric, the whir of a phone case zipper opening. He held his breath. Mia walked back up the aisle. At that moment, Dana straightened and slipped her phone, her burner phone, into Elijah's backpack, which was snugly tucked beside his seat. The movement was seamless. No flourish, no indication. She leaned back and closed her eyes like nothing happened. Elijah didn't feel it, but Mia did. Her head turned toward him. She smiled, then hesitated when she saw the tension in his shoulders. "Sir," she whispered as she bent down, "are you okay?" He wanted to tell her. He wanted to say someone just put something in my bag, but he didn't know if she would believe him. He forced a small nod. "I'm fine." His voice cracked slightly. "Just thinking." She nodded and moved on. Elijah unzipped his bag and checked inside his pencil case. Everything normal, his tablets, his sketchbook, his pens. He zipped it closed and leaned back, exhaling slowly. Dana reached into her handbag. She retrieved her work phone again and waved it as though to show it was back in her hand. "Oh, there it is," she said, relief in her tone. She tapped a text message to herself. Her eyes skimmed the screen. Then she pocketed the phone and leaned forward. Elijah braced himself. Dana tapped Elijah's shoulder lightly. "Excuse me, young man." Her voice was soft but demanding. He turned. "Yes." Dana pointed at his backpack. "Would you mind opening that for me? I just want to make sure nothing fell out when I bumped it." Elijah's heart thundered. He stared at her phone now in her hand, the burner phone she had planted. He realized exactly what she was doing. He opened his bag slowly, hands shaken. She watched every movement. Mia watched, too, hovering behind him. Inside his bag, on top of his sketchbook and tablet, lay the phone, sleek and black, no identifying marks. It was not his. Elijah froze. Dana let out a soft gasp. "That phone! That's it! That's mine! You stole it!" A hush fell over the cabin. Mia's expression went from concern to confusion to alarm. She stepped forward. "Sir, is that your phone?" Elijah's voice came out soft but firm. "No, I don't know how it got there." Dana's eyes flickered with triumph. She turned to the row behind and called out discreetly, "That boy stole my phone." The men in suits leaned forward. A woman with a notebook peeked over the headrest. Phones came out. Cameras activated. Elijah swallowed. He felt the warmth of tears forming. Not from guilt, from the shock of betrayal. Mia knelt beside him. "Sir, let me see your ID and boarding pass again." Elijah opened his folder, hands trembling. He handed over his papers. The plane was silent now, except for the soft whine of the air conditioning. Dana gave a little nod of satisfaction. "See, I told you something was off." Mia scanned his card again, looked at his ticket. Her brow furrowed, confusion flickering. She met Elijah's eyes. "Everything is in order." Dana raised her voice just enough for the cabin to hear. "No, it's not." He's a thief." A murmur went through the cabin. A woman, 2 seats down, shook her head. "He looks so innocent." But then someone else chimed in. "You never know." A man further back said, "If it's in his bag, he took it." Elijah's stomach dropped. His work, his innocence, his father's trust, all felt like they were slipping away. Mia held up her hand. "Everyone, please, lower your voices. Let me speak to the pilot and the purser." The cabin quieted. Passengers watched her and Dana and Elijah in a tense tableau. Mia whispered to the lead flight attendant in the galley. She nodded and walked away. Dana turned back to Elijah. Her voice was quiet, but everyone heard. "I'm doing everyone a favor by speaking up." Elijah closed his eyes for a moment, trying to stop his heart from pounding. He remembered his father's advice, "Stand your ground. Evidence will set you free." He opened his eyes and looked at Dana. "I didn't take that phone." Dana's lips curled into a half smile. "The evidence is right there." She pointed at the phone still in his bag. Elijah took a deep breath and reached for the burner phone. He lifted it slowly from the bottom of his backpack and placed it on the seat between them. The cabin held its breath. He tapped the screen and watched a locked icon appear. No contacts, no app history, no photos. It looked brand new. He looked at Dana. "Why would I have a phone I can't open?" Dana's smile faltered. Elijah drew in another breath. "I've never seen this phone before today." Dana's eyes darted. She knew she had no proof beyond the planted phone. Mia returned with a couple of crew members. They took the phone and Elijah's papers and crossed to whisper by the cockpit door. Passers engrossed in their phones lowered their screens. The cabin pulled back into cautious silence. Elijah sat still. He realized the entire cabin was watching. Not just him and Dana, everyone. He closed his eyes and counted again. 1, 2. He focused on the mechanics of his breath. 3, 4. He thought about the first time he built a model with Legos, the way his hands felt on the bricks. 5, 6. He remembered the moment his father called him a prodigy, the way pride shone in his dad's voice. 7, 8. He felt the mic of the intercom click as the purser spoke. "Nebraska Air Flight 218. We have a potential security incident in first class. We will remain in level flight while we verify this situation." A chill ran through Elijah. 9. He opened his eyes. The plane's lights dimmed slightly in standby mode. Overhead, bins appeared to float in half light. 10. He leaned forward and whispered, "This isn't over." The cabin lights remained dim, but the air felt heavy. The silent tension had evolved into something louder, something contagious. Passengers shifted in their seats. Faces that had once been polite masks of neutrality now revealed curiosity, suspicion, even eagerness. A well-dressed businessman tapped his partner's arm and whispered, "Can you believe this kid? I saw him pull something from his bag." His partner nodded, phone in hand. "Everyone has video on their phones. Let's see it." Screens appeared. Live stream icons popped up in tiny corners of screens. People murmured about proof and evidence. Elijah Reed felt every pair of eyes. It was like walking through a hall of mirrors, except every mirror reflected a stranger's fear and judgment. Mia Sanchez hovered near seat 2, arms crossed, trying to protect Elijah from the swarm of doubt. She cleared her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We are verifying everything with the cockpit." Her voice was firm but strained. The passengers seemed to hear her, but their expressions remained hawkish. Dana Mulroney leaned forward. She spoke with false pity. "I hate to say I told you so, but I did warn you all. We have to keep this flight safe." A collective murmur rose. A woman in the row behind spoke up loudly. What if he had dangerous electronics? He could have hacked the controls. Suddenly, a ripple of gasps and nods moved down the cabin. Elijah swallowed hard. His throat felt dry. He opened his mouth to protest, but no sound came. All he managed was a tremor in his voice. "It is not my phone. Please believe me." An older gentleman in a designer scarf shook his head. "Stop talking. Let the authorities handle this." Another man pointed his smartphone at Elijah. "Stand up so I can film you properly." Elijah sat still. He refused to stand. He refused to give them more reason to treat him like a criminal. Mia stepped in front of him protectively. "Sir, you will have your chance to explain once we land safely. For now, please allow us to handle it." The man glanced at Mia, then back at Elijah. He scoffed. "You're protecting him. Why not the rest of us?" Mia's knuckles whitened around her notepad. She carefully chose her words. "I'm ensuring everyone remains safe and calm. I'm doing my job." His partner shook her head. "This is crazy. A kid, just a child. This is why we can't have nice things." At that, a younger passenger slammed his fist on the armrest. "Enough, he's a kid. You all need to back off." Silence followed for exactly 1 second. Then the well-dressed businessman leaned in and hissed, "You're on his side. This is safety, not a charity case." A wave of arguments rose like a storm. Elijah's chest constricted. He looked out the window. Clouds drifted by as silently as sinners avoiding judgment. He clutched his sketch pad and pencil like a lifeline. He could hear his own heart beat, loud and out of control. He closed his eyes for a moment, wanting to vanish, but when he opened them, the mob had gathered. Mia called out, voice louder, "This is an airplane in flight. You must all stay seated and quiet." Her words cut through the noise, but only half-pierced. A phone rang. A passenger answered. He was live streaming. "Everyone listen. I'm going to show you what this kid did. He's a thief." Elijah leaned forward and hissed, "Stop it, please." His whisper echoed. More phones pointed at him like weapons. The cameras captured his face contorted in pain. A mother in the next seat leaned over to comfort him. "Sweetheart, it's going to be okay." Elijah managed a weak nod. He was grateful for that one act of kindness. Dana crossed her arms triumphantly. She had triggered the avalanche. She had painted Elijah as a criminal in the air. She leaned in to the man next to her. "See what happens when you let these people in first class. They should be grateful to sit in the back." The man chuckled. "Exactly. This is why we put them in their place." Elijah felt bile rise in his throat. He swallowed, forced it down. He thought of his mother making pancakes this morning. He thought of his father's smile when he finished his first model. He thought of the awards ceremony. He thought of his dreams. His dreams felt miles away now. A woman 2 rows ahead suddenly stood up, her phone in hand. "I want to see that phone evidence." She tapped her screen. The video paused on the image of the burner phone in Elijah's backpack. The cabin erupted. "That phone belongs to her," she said, pointing at Dana. Dana's face paled. She stammered, "That's not mine. That's someone else's." A hush fell again. Someone called through the aisle, "Let's see the footage from flight attendant's camera." Mia shook her head. "We don't share security footage on the plane. The authorities will review it." Passengers groaned, phones went dark, the eyes still focused on Elijah. He tensed his jaw. Something deep inside braced. He would not let them see him break. But the cabin felt too small. His pencil slipped from his fingers. He caught it before it hit the floor. Airlines' policies and etiquette seemed like distant ideals now. What remained was primal fear. Hate. He recalled his father's words. Don't let fear change who you are. He took a slow breath. The plane shuddered slightly. Another round of mild turbulence. It shook the aisles and rattled overhead bins. It rattled the nerves of every passenger. Mia grasped the rail and steadied herself. She met Elijah's eyes and offered a small nod. On her signal, he took a deep breath and spoke up, voice trembling but clear enough. I did not take that phone. I have never seen that phone before today. Her nod expanded into a subtle but powerful gesture of solidarity. Mia returned to her seat and braced against the turbulence. Dana Mulroney jumped in. He lied. He's hiding something. Elijah held firm. His hands shook, but his words never wavered. No, I'm not lying. He remembered the time he unveiled his design in front of a judge panel. How calm he felt, how sure of his work. He tried to channel that confidence now, not for him. For everyone who ever felt judged by the color of their skin instead of the content of their character. Someone in the back muttered, "Let's just land this plane. Let the cops decide." Another shouted, "Yeah, we're paying for this flight. Thank you very much." A mother clutched her child and shot Elijah a sad look. I don't know what to believe. That hit him hardest. A child's parent uncertain about him. He felt a pang of guilt mixed with sorrow. He closed his eyes. He drew in another breath. He whispered to himself, "Hold on." Mia called out again. "We are 2 minutes from landing. Please remain calm. Authorities will board immediately." Elijah felt the heat of all those eyes on him for one last moment. Then he heard a new sound, a low engine roar as the plane began its descent. The cabin lights brightened slightly. The seatbelt sign remained on. Everyone clicked their belts tighter. The man who had originally cried out for security leaned back. Satisfied, he stroked his beard. Finally, let's get him off. Dana smirked like a victor. She belongs in the back where she can't cause trouble. Elijah gathered his sketch pad and pencil. He tucked the pad carefully under his arm. He sat tall. For once, he let them see his resolve. He would not flee. He would face them with dignity. He whispered under his breath, "I am more than what you think." Outside, the runway lights appeared like stars guiding them home. Inside, the mob prepared to feast, and Elijah Reed prepared himself for the fight of his life. The plane's wheels rattled on the runway as passengers braced. Elijah Reed felt each vibration as if it were a quake in his chest. Authorities had already been summoned. Moments ago, the cabin was a mob. Now it was silent anticipation. No one spoke. No one looked away. Elijah's sketch pad felt like a weight. His pencil rested on its page, abandoned. He stared at the blank spot where he had intended to draw an open courtyard idea. Now that courtyard felt unreachable. Elijah closed his eyes for a moment and tried to center himself. Breathe in 5 counts. Hold. Breathe out 5 counts. He remembered his father teaching him that method before every competition. It worked then. He hoped it would work now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold. 4, 3, 2, 1. But his thoughts tumbled like scrambled blocks. What if they never believe me when they see the phone in my bag? Will they see the real me, or just the color of my skin? He opened his eyes and blinked back hot tears. He thought of his mother's gentle voice telling him every morning that he was brilliant. He thought of how safe she made him feel when she tucked him in at night. He thought of her smile as she watched him build Lego towers. His chest ached. The walls felt like they were closing in. He pressed his palms into his eyes, willing the tears back. He had to be strong. He had to prove himself. He could not break now. The flight attendant, Mia Sanchez, knelt beside him. Her voice was soft. "Are you all right, Elijah?" He managed a nod. Voice caught. "I am trying." She reached out and touched his shoulder gently. "I know this is hard. Just hold on a bit longer." Elijah squeezed his eyes shut again. He let his mind drift to the morning he first discovered his gift for design. He had been 4 years old. His blocks fell in a spill. Without thinking, he placed each one purposefully. He built a bridge. His mother's eyes had lit up. Never forget that he told him. That was the moment he realized he could build something meaningful. The shuttle doors to the cockpit opened. The lead flight attendant spoke with Captain Wyatt Evans. The cabin lights brightened. The seatbelt sign stayed on. Another minute of silent torture. Elijah felt a soft tremor in his leg. The presence of uniformed officers in the aisle. Their badges gleamed under the lights. He swallowed so hard his throat hurt. Dana Mulroney sat back in her seat, smug expression returning. She crossed her arms. Her eyes glittered with victory. Elijah stared at her for a moment. The phone she had planted was in his bag. There was no way to remove it now. It would be evidence, proof of an innocence he still possessed in his heart. His vision blurred. The cabin lights whirled. He pressed his hands over his face, fingers digging into his temples. "I can't do this," he thought. "I can't let them see me like this," but inside, a storm raged. Memories of judges telling him his project was the future. Professors praising his creativity. Moments of pure triumph. They all felt like distant echoes, overwhelmed by one shrill voice screaming injustice. He heard a soft sob. It was him. He opened his mouth to stifle it, but the sob emerged anyway. The tears came unbidden. Mia knelt again, her voice cracked. "Elijah." He pulled his hands away from his face. Tears streamed down his cheeks. His nose reddened. He tried to speak. Words tumbled out broken. "I didn't do anything wrong." His voice shook. "Why are they doing this to me?" Around him, people watched. Some looked away in shame. Some leaned forward with renewed suspicion. Elijah wiped his tears on the back of his hand. He hated that he looked so small, so afraid. He wanted to disappear, to vanish into the seat, to turn off the lights, to rewind time. Mia gently guided him upright. She placed her hand on his back. "It is going to be okay. I promise." He wanted to believe her. He closed his eyes and nodded. "I have to believe her." He thought, "I have to." A uniformed officer approached. He spoke to Mia quietly. She nodded and looked at Elijah with worry. Officer Thompson cleared his throat. "Young man, I need to speak with you in the aisle." Elijah blinked through his tears. He felt every passenger's eyes on him. He took a breath and stood, clutching his sketchpad to his chest. He stepped awkwardly into the aisle, knees weak. Officers flanked him. Mia stayed close behind. Dana watched with a smug grin. The life drained from Elijah's cheeks as the realization hit. He would be escorted off the plane, handcuffed like a criminal. Elijah's legs shook with each step. He focused on the stripe of carpet under his shoes. blue and gray, simple pattern. He remembered his father's advice, keep your head high, even if the world thinks you did wrong, even if life throws you off balance. He walked. Mia followed. The aisle multiplied the distance between him and his safe place. His sketch pad felt like his only shield. They reached the cabin door to the jet bridge. Another uniformed person waited with cuffs. Elijah's heart pounded so loudly he thought it would burst. They opened the door and bright sunlight flooded in. He squinted. The ramp was crowded with police lights faster than reality. Sirens off in the distance. He stepped out onto the jet bridge. The plane door closed behind him with a thud. A wall of noise pressed in sirens, footsteps, murmurs. He was no longer Elijah Reed the prodigy. Now he was Elijah Reed the suspect. Tears spilled again. He tried to blink faster, but they kept coming. He looked up at the first officer. Officer Thompson's face was unreadable, but not cruel. Elijah's voice cracked. "Please believe me." Officer Thompson gave a curt nod. "We will get to the bottom of this, but for now, you need to come with us." Elijah swallowed. He wanted to ask for his father. He remembered his father's trusted calm. Instead, he whispered, "I just want to go to Chicago." His voice faded as they led him down the ramp. Mia watched from the cabin door, her hand on the frame. She mouthed, "I'm sorry." Elijah's knees buckled almost. He pressed his water bottle into his mouth and drank. The cold water did nothing to cool his burning cheeks. He turned back for a moment, saw Dana Mulroney's triumphant face through the window. His chest twisted. But then he saw Mia's worried eyes in the glass behind Dana. He recalled her promise. "It is going to be okay." He repeated it in his mind, over and over as they led him away. The shadow of the plane loomed over him. The world that had been his safe space was now a place of fear. His legs carried him forward anyway. Each step a silent vow, I will not let this define me. Outside the jet bridge at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, chaos and order collided in frantic harmony. Emergency vehicles lined the tarmac, their flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the polished aluminum of Nebraska Air Flight 218. Officers hurried about, radios crackling. Ground crew looked on with confusion. Passengers filed out behind the uniformed escort, whispering and pointing. And then he arrived. Malcolm Reed stepped off the stairway from his black SUV, his tailored charcoal suit crisp, tie perfectly knotted. His posture was calm, almost statuesque, as if he'd practiced the moment in a mirror 100 times, but his eyes were storm clouds, fierce with paternal worry. He strode up the ramp toward the aircraft door, past the cluster of officers, past the anxious ground crew, past the murmuring passengers. His gaze never wavered. He looked for one face, Elijah, inside. Mia Sanchez knelt beside a seat, watching as Officer Thompson and two colleagues prepared to lead Elijah down the ramp in handcuffs. Mia's badge caught the light as she rose and slipped to the exit aisle, clearing the path. Malcolm reached the door. He looked down and saw his son, trembling but upright, flanked by officers. Malcolm's breath caught. "Elijah," he said, voice deep and steady, cutting through the siren's wail and the gathering crowd. "Come to me." Elijah's head whipped around. His face, tear-streaked and pale, broke into relief. The officers unclasped the handcuffs at Malcolm's nod. Elijah ran into his father's arms. He wrapped his small arms around Malcolm's waist, burying his face in the tailored lapel. "Daddy," he whispered, voice muffled. They think I'm a thief. Malcolm's arms tightened. He closed his eyes for a second, fighting the surge of anger. He lowered his voice to a gentle growl, an edge of controlled power in every word. They were wrong, he said. You didn't do anything wrong. An officer stepped forward respectfully. Sir, we arrested your son based on a report from a passenger. There was a phone found in his bag. Malcolm turned to the officer, calm fury in his gaze. Which passenger reported it, he asked. The officer glanced back at his notes. Dana Mulroney, former HR director. She said she lost her work phone on board. Malcolm's jaw tightened. He looked over at Dana, who was now standing among the crowd on the tarmac. She appeared fragile, her posture collapsing as reality began to bite. Her phone was in her hand, glowing with notifications. Malcolm turned to the officer. I'll take it from here, he said quietly. The officer nodded. Understood, sir. He touched his hat and stepped aside. Malcolm guided Elijah away from the door under the canopy of flashing lights. People parted, giving them space. Reporters jockeyed for position, cameras pointed like rifles. But Malcolm didn't break stride. His eyes stayed on Elijah. Once they reached the ground vehicle, an unmarked van with tinted windows, Malcolm shielded his son and led him inside. Mia Sanchez followed at a discreet distance, inside the van. Malcolm closed the door and offered Elijah a bottle of water. Elijah drank, trembling, while Malcolm removed the cap. They won't hurt you now, Malcolm said softly. I'm here. Elijah's eyes brimmed. I'm sorry. Daddy. Malcolm shook his head. There's nothing to be sorry for. He crouched down so he was eye to eye with his son. Elijah, I need you to tell me every single detail of what happened. Elijah swallowed the last drop of water and began in a quiet, trembling voice. She said I shouldn't be in first class. She said I stole her phone. She planted it in my bag. Enough. Malcolm reached out, cups Elijah's face in his hands. We will prove your innocence, but you have to be strong for a little longer. Okay? Elijah nodded. Okay. Malcolm hugged him once more and guided him to the adjacent airport lounge that Nebraska Air had opened for their passengers. Inside, the lights were bright. Chairs lined up like soldiers, a dessert table spread along one wall, but Elijah and Malcolm barely noticed. An airline manager in a crisp uniform approached, hands raised in apology. Mr. Reed, on behalf of Nebraska Air, I am so sorry. We have the footage from our cabin cameras. I reviewed it myself. Malcolm held up a hand. I don't need your apology. I need you to deactivate Ms. Mulroney's access and provide me the raw footage. The manager blinked. Of course. Malcolm turned to Mia, who had followed them in. Officer Thompson is here, Mia said. He saw the entire plane. He'll corroborate your son's story. Malcolm nodded approval. Good. Please, tell him I'll see him in a moment. Mia offered a tight, determined smile. I'm glad you're here. Malcolm placed a hand on Mia's shoulder. Thank you for protecting him. I appreciate your courage. Mia's eyes flickered. I did what I should have. Outside the lounge windows, Dana Mulroney was being approached by security. She looked smaller than Malcolm, unraveled. Her phone was already confiscated. The reporters turned cameras on her like vultures. Malcolm guided Elijah to a seat near the window. Look, he said, pointing out at the line of squad cars. We're going to handle this together. Elijah nodded, wiping the last tear away. His sketch pad was still in his backpack. He reached in, yet hesitated to open it. Malcolm followed his line of thought. "You want to draw?" he asked. "Keep a record." Elijah nodded. He pulled out his sketch pad and placed it on his lap. He opened to a fresh page. Malcolm knelt beside him. "Tell me what you want to do," he said quietly. Elijah drew a line from one edge of the paper to the other. "A horizon. Build a sky bridge," he murmured. "Something that connects people." Malcolm smiled. "That's perfect." A soft buzz came from Malcolm's phone. He glanced down at a message: "Conference postponed. We'll update." He glanced at Elijah. "We'll get you there for your summit." Elijah's eyes lit up, but Malcolm's focus was already shifting back to the fallout outside. He stood and buttoned his jacket. "Come on," he said. "It's time to clear your name." He guided Elijah toward the exit. Mia walked with them. The airline manager followed. Through the glass wall, they watched Dana being escorted away in handcuffs. Her face was pale, eyes wide. Behind her, the reporters circled like sharks. A hush fell over the lounge as passengers peered out. Then the captain appeared, walking through the crowd. He approached Malcolm. "Mr. Reed," he said respectfully, "I'd like to personally apologize. We jumped to conclusions. We failed your son." Malcolm nodded curtly. "Thank you. Let's make this right." The captain turned to Mia. "Thank you for standing up." Mia nodded again, exhaustion in her eyes. Outside, Officer Thompson waved them over. He walked up. "Sir," he said to Malcolm, "my apologies for the way we treated Elijah. I've reviewed the situation. I'll submit my report to the chief." Malcolm extended his hand. "Thank you, Officer Thompson." He turned to Elijah. "You ready?" Buddy Elijah closed his sketch pad, placed it inside his bag. He squared his shoulders, looking as composed as any 9-year-old could in that moment. "I'm ready." Malcolm smiled tenderly and placed an arm around his son. As they exited toward the waiting vehicles, the world seemed to shift. The lights of justice flashed more brightly than the emergency vehicles outside, and in that moment, Elijah Reed knew that no injustice could stand against the power of truth, especially when that truth was carried on the shoulders of someone brave enough to demand it. The morning sun had shifted higher in the sky, painting the tarmac in brilliant gold as Nebraska Air Flight 218 sat immobilized. Passengers had long since disembarked into the terminal or were gathered in the airline lounge. The distant hum of airport activity had begun to replace the chaos of sirens, but the memory of what happened hours ago still pulsed in the air. Inside the lounge, Elijah Reed and his father, Malcolm, stood near the window, watching a line of uniformed officers approach the aircraft in a tight formation. The officers advanced with precise, deliberate movements, like a choreographed ballet aimed not at a child genius, but at a single middle-aged woman who had nearly destroyed his innocence. Malcolm placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder, guiding him back toward the entrance of the plane. Mia Sanchez followed close behind, her expression resolute. "We need to get the evidence room footage and then accompany the officers back on board," Malcolm said quietly. Elijah nodded, tucking his sketch pad under his arm. He wiped his eyes, determined not to cry again, not when the final act of justice was about to unfold. Out on the tarmac, the ground crew had formed a corridor. Airport police, accompanied by federal air marshals, stepped onto the jet bridge and through the door of the silent plane. The interior was eerily empty now. No shouting passengers, no crowd around seat 2A. just the soft hum of the ventilation system and the faint echo of footsteps on the cabin floor. In the galley, officers paused. The cabin manager handed them a flash drive labeled Flight 218 Security Footage. A lead marshal inserted it into a rugged laptop. The screen flickered to life, showing the first-class cabin from multiple angles. The feed rolled Dana Mulroney's hand brushing Elijah's backpack, the phone sliding quietly into his bag, her triumphant glance at the row behind her. One officer lowered his night vision goggles. "We've got it," he announced softly into his radio. At that moment, the flight attendant, Mia Sanchez, and the Reeds emerged from the forward cabin. Dana Mulroney stood just inside the door, framed by the bright light behind her, flanked by two airline supervisors who wore expressions of mortification. Dana's glossy smile had drained away. She pressed her hands together at chest level, fingers trembling. Behind her, reporters and airport staff watched through the windows of the jet bridge, drawn by the gravity of the situation. Malcolm stepped forward, voice calm but unyielding. "Ms. Mulroney," he said, tone low but carrying, "you have been caught on video deliberately placing your phone in my son's bag. I'm authorizing these officers to take you into custody." Dana's eyes darted to the laptop screen, then to the officers. She opened her mouth, then closed it, words failing her. Officer Thompson produced handcuffs. His expression was professional but grim. "You're under arrest for child endangerment, filing a false report, and attempted fraud," he said, snapping the cuffs closed around her wrists. Dana's complexion drained to ashen white. She gasped. "No, this is a misunderstanding," she began, voice shaky. Captain Wyatt Evans stepped forward from behind the officers. He wore his uniform as a badge of authority and responsibility. "Ms. Mulroney, you endangered a minor on a commercial flight. You'll have your opportunity to present your side in court." Dana's gaze snapped up at him. Her lips quivered. She looked as though she might faint. Mia Sanchez, who had watched every second, stepped beside the officers. "Thank you," she said quietly to Captain Evans, then, softer, to Elijah. "It's over." Elijah felt a rush of relief and triumph so intense his knees trembled. He swallowed. "You were right," he told Mia. "Thank you." She nodded, eyes shining. "I knew you." Officers led Dana down the jet bridge, past gasping bystanders and flashing cameras. Reporters shouted questions, but she said nothing, her face a mask of stunned humiliation. Inside the cabin, passengers who had returned for their belongings clustered, watching through the windows. Some covered their mouths in shock, others turned their heads, unwilling to watch the spectacle. A woman who had previously recorded Elijah began to fumble with her phone. She deleted videos, tears in her eyes. The man who had hissed "Stand up now" looked down, hands in pockets. An elderly couple wiped away tears of remorse, whispering apologies to one another. Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, then placed a hand on Elijah's back. "Let's go home," he said. Elijah nodded, still absorbing the reversal. He felt the weight of all those accusatory eyes melting into relief and regret. It was overwhelming to witness their shame. But he also felt compassion. They were human, flawed. He understood how quickly people could forget empathy when fear took over. They reached the door and stepped out into the bright runway light. The cool morning air felt fresh on Elijah's cheeks. He inhaled slowly, filling his lungs with the reality of freedom. Mia and the cabin manager joined them outside. "We'll need your statement for the FAA report," the manager said to Elijah. And your father's? Malcolm gave a curt nod. We'll cooperate fully. Mia squeezed Elijah's shoulder. You did great. Elijah's lips curved into a weary smile. He looked out at the line of vehicles, police cars, a corporate SUV, and the Nebraska air van. They piled in behind the plane's wing, forming a protective circle. A uniformed detective approached with a clipboard. Mr. Reed. Can I have a word? Malcolm nodded. Inside the van, the detective sat across from Elijah. He spoke in measured tones. Son, what you saw, hearing Ms. Mulroney's comments, and then watching her plant the phone, was that what happened? Elijah took a breath. Yes, sir. She put her phone in my bag while pretending to look for hers. The detective wrote quickly. Did you see any other evidence or hear anything else that could help? Elijah closed his eyes, recalling the whispers and the tension. She whispered about safety and kept staring, and she tapped me on the shoulder to open my bag. The detective nodded. Thank you. Your statement will be very important. Elijah exhaled, relief washing over him. His father gave him a proud look. Outside, Dana Mulroney was placed in a police vehicle. She stared back at the plane as the doors shut. Some passengers leaned forward, silently condemning her. Others watched with hollow expressions, regret coursing through them. Malcolm Reed walked over to the group of crew members. He caught Mia's eye and nodded his gratitude. Captain Evans approached next. I apologize again. Mr. Reed, we should have acted differently. Malcolm clasped the captain's hand. Thank you for correcting it. They parted ways as the van drove toward the terminal exit. Elijah looked out at the distant skyline of Minneapolis, thinking about how high he had fallen from a celebrated prodigy to a suspect and how truth had pulled him back up. A voice chimed softly from the front seat. Are you hungry, buddy? Elijah turned. His stomach rumbled. Starbucks, Malcolm suggested. Elijah grinned for the first time in hours. Yeah. The van merged onto the roadway, leaving the ordeal behind. But the memory would stay with everyone who witnessed it, proof that fear and prejudice can strike in an instant. But justice and compassion can still prevail. And in that knowledge, the world found a glimmer of hope. In the days that followed, the story of Nebraska Air Flight 218 became a media sensation. Headlines blared across every news outlet. Social media exploded with outrage, support, and once more, disbelief. A 9-year-old boy had been falsely accused of theft in midair. The world wondered how such a thing could happen. Back in the stark fluorescent lights of the airline's corporate headquarters, a special meeting convened. Malcolm Reed sat at the head of a long conference table. Surrounding him were the airline's senior executives, legal counsel, and human resources leaders. Mia Sanchez stood to one side, flanked by 2 union representatives. The mood was tense but purposeful. Malcolm cleared his throat. It was the same calm, commanding presence he'd shown on the tarmac. But now he wore a steel rim around his voice. We need full transparency on this incident, he began. I want every email, every internal memo regarding Ms. Mulroney's conduct over the past year. The HR director swallowed. We have some records of complaints. Yes, she was under review for several policy violations. Malcolm nodded. Pull them now. We will review her file thoroughly. Anyone else who was complicit needs to be held accountable as well. A hush fell. The executives exchanged nervous glances. The truth was that Dana Mulroney had friends in high places. But Malcolm had resources too. He pressed his hand to a stack of printouts on the table. "These are the transcripts of her messages," he said. He slid them across. "Read them." The room went silent as the managers read. Emails where Dana referred to entitled children and people who don't know their place. Chat logs where she bragged about catching someone in the act and making a point. HR notes about her demeanor and pattern of hostility toward certain passenger demographics. The airline's general counsel cleared her throat. These messages clearly demonstrate premeditation. Ms. Mulroney wasn't acting out of genuine safety concerns. She targeted Elijah because of, well, the content of his character didn't fit her expectations. Malcolm's eyes never left the papers. Terminate her employment immediately. With cause. Notify the board. I want a public statement acknowledging our failure and outlining the steps we will take to prevent this from happening again. He looked up. This is more than a PR crisis. It is a moral crisis. We have to rebuild trust. A week later, Nebraska Air issued a formal apology. The CEO read his prepared statement on camera while sat at an oak desk with the airline's logo behind him. "We deeply regret the distress caused to young Elijah Reed and his family. Nebraska Air failed to protect a minor from false allegations fueled by prejudice. Effective immediately, we are implementing mandatory bias training for all employees, upgrading our onboard complaint procedure, and establishing a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination." Elijah watched the video with his father and mother at home. He sat between them on the couch, clutching his sketch pad. His mother held his hand. "It feels good to have an apology," Elijah whispered. "But what about everyone else?" His mother squeezed his hand. "Words are a start, but actions matter more." Shortly afterwards, the airline recruited Mia Sanchez to lead a new diversity and inclusion task force. They announced a scholarship in Elijah's name for young designers of color. They updated their employee handbook to include strict protocols against false complaints. Meanwhile, Dana Mulroney faced her own reckoning. News crews camped outside her home. Former colleagues who once nodded at her power now turned away in shame. Her bank accounts were frozen pending civil suits for defamation and child endangerment. Corporate boards rescinded her invitations. Her reputation lay in tatters. Dana sat alone in an empty apartment. The walls were bare. Only a single painting remained an abstract swirl in gray and white. She stared at it as if expecting it to move, but nothing did. She pulled out her phone. No notifications, no messages. She opened her travel itinerary to see miles accumulated. She deleted the app. She typed to search safety concerns on board LAX to Chicago. Nothing relevant. She typed again, Nebraska Air incident. A flood of articles. Every headline said essentially the same thing: white passenger falsely accuses black boy. 5 minutes later, justice served. Tears ran down her cheeks. Not from sorrow for Elijah, from the ruin of her world. She realized too late that she had gambled with the child's life and lost. The irony of her downfall by the very forces she manipulated was not lost on her, but it offered no comfort. Across town, a special assembly convened at the Youth Innovation Center in Chicago. The mayor, city council members, educators, and tech executives gathered. They unveiled the Reed Fellowship for Budding Architects of Color. Elijah was invited to speak. He stood on stage, dressed in a crisp blue blazer without pinstripes, holding his sketch pad under one arm. The room fell silent as he approached the podium. He cleared his throat and looked out at the sea of faces. "When they look at me," he began, voice steady. They saw a boy, a threat, but underneath, I am the same person who builds with Lego bricks, who dreams in lines and curves. We all deserve the chance to build something better. He paused. Every eye was on him. I forgive the person who tried to break me. Not because what she did was right, but because forgiveness frees my heart to keep creating, not to stay trapped in anger. A roar of applause shook the hall. Tears glistened on parents' cheeks. Educators wiped eyes. Fingers snapped pipes of approval. Elijah closed his eyes and took a deep breath. In that moment, he knew the unmasking was complete. The world had seen the truth. Now it would have to decide what to do with it. Back at home, Elijah's mother tucked him into bed later that night. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "I'm so proud of you." Elijah lay there, sketch pad on the nightstand. He closed his eyes and thought of the upcoming summit. He knew he would face new crowds, but he also knew he could stand tall. His last thought before sleep took him was of a new design, a bridge that floated between two worlds connecting people, crossing divides. And for Elijah Reed, that bridge was more than architecture. It was the promise of a world built on empathy, not fear. Winter light filtered through the courthouse windows as Dana Mulroney stood before the judge. The gallery was packed with journalists, activists, community leaders, and some of the very passengers who had once accused Elijah Reed. Flashing cameras illuminated the rows of empty chairs at the front. Her shoulders were hunched, her eyes darting. The air was thick with anticipation. Malcolm Reed sat in the front row, his tie loosened, hands folded calmly on his lap. Beside him, Mia Sanchez nodded quietly, her badge clipped to her coat. Behind them, a few of the first-class travelers who had turned on Elijah now fidgeted with their coats, avoiding eye contact. The bailiff called the court to order. The judge, a woman in her early 50s, peered over thick spectacles. She spoke in measured tones. This court is convened to address the charges against Ms. Dana Mulroney. Ms. Mulroney has been charged with child endangerment, filing a false report, and fraud by deceit in a federal aviation matter. Ms. Mulroney, how do you plead? She raised her voice enough for everyone to hear. Not guilty, Your Honor. Murmurs rippled through the room. Elijah's heart pounded. He sat forward, clutching his mother's hand, who had come to support him. He understood the stakes. Dana's plea would determine if he had true closure or if the ordeal might drag on. Over the next hour, the prosecution presented evidence. The airline security footage played on a large monitor. Passengers gasped as they saw Dana's hand gently slip the phone into Elijah's backpack. Her lips curved into a small smile that transformed her expression from concern to victory in an instant. Officer Thompson took the stand next. He described how he had initially believed the charge but, after reviewing the evidence, realized that the only person who had acted deceptively was Dana. The child was terrified. "We acted on a false premise. I apologize for that. Elijah, I will carry that regret with me," he concluded. Next, Mia Sanchez shared her testimony. She told the court how she had watched the entire incident, how her instincts had told her something was wrong, and how she'd protected Elijah at personal risk. "My duty is to every passenger. I failed to trust the truth initially. I will never let prejudice cloud my judgment again," she said, looking directly at Dana from the stand. Dana's defense attorney tried to argue that she had genuinely believed the phone had been stolen. He played snippets of audio where Dana's voice quavered, suggesting confusion rather than malice, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury watched in silence, absorbing every frame of video and every first-hand account. Finally, the judge turned toward Dana. "Ms. Mulroney, the evidence demonstrates that you intentionally endangered a minor, caused unnecessary alarm, and filed a false report to authorities. These actions are unacceptable and have real consequences." The judge paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "In light of these findings, I hereby find you guilty on all counts." A collective exhale filled the courtroom. Journalists scribbled notes, activists hugged. Some of the passengers in the gallery wept silently. The judge continued, "The sentencing for these offenses will take place next week. In the meantime, Ms. Mulroney, you will remain on supervised release pending sentencing." Dana nodded, her face pallid. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Reporters shouted questions. Overhead, a drone hovered. Malcolm Reed guided Elijah through the press throng. "Son, do you want to say anything?" he asked gently. Elijah took a deep breath. He stepped to the microphone and cleared his throat. "I just want everyone to remember that fear can make people do terrible things, but kindness and truth can fix it. Please judge people by who they are, not by what you think they might be." Reporters clicked furiously. A few passengers held up signs that read, "Justice for Elijah." Others simply listened. Malcolm put an arm around his son. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You were brave." Elijah nodded, swallowing hard. He felt both relief and lingering sorrow. The ordeal was nearly over, but its mark would remain. A week later, the sentencing hearing convened in the same courtroom. The judge reviewed a pre-sentence report that outlined Dana's actions over months, her record of biased behavior, and the emotional trauma inflicted on Elijah. Community organizations and civil rights groups submitted victim impact statements. They described how the case shone a spotlight on systemic prejudice and the need for stronger protections for unaccompanied minors. Elijah's own written statement was read aloud by his father. "Your Honor, I stand before you not as a criminal, but as a child who loves to build and create. I forgive Ms. Mulroney because holding on to anger will only harm me, but I ask that her sentence reflect how serious it is to use fear against a child." Malcolm's voice cracked as he finished reading. The judge then delivered the sentence. "Ms. Mulroney, your actions endangered a child and undermined public trust in aviation safety. Today, this court sentences you to 24 months of supervised release, mandatory bias training, and 200 hours of community service in programs supporting children's welfare. Additionally, you are fined $2,000 and must publicly apologize to Elijah Reed." Dana's lips trembled as the judge spoke. She looked at Elijah, then away. Malcolm's voice broke the heavy silence. "May justice serve as a lesson," he said softly. Outside. The press captured Dana's exit from the courthouse. She paused and spoke into the sea of microphones. "I am sorry," she said in a small, broken voice. "I never intended harm. I truly apologize to Elijah and to anyone I hurt." Some reporters challenged her apology. Many looked skeptical. But the moment was recorded for history. Meanwhile, at a local community center, Elijah was invited along with his father to unveil a new mural celebrating resilience and unity. Local artists had collaborated on a large-scale painting depicting children of various backgrounds building a bridge. Elijah's sketch of a sky bridge was the centerpiece. He and his father pulled the cloth away together. A cheer erupted. Families clapped. Children pointed at the bright colors. The mural's heart was Elijah's design, a shining testament to the power of creativity and unity. Elijah's mother held his hand and whispered, "This is what matters." He nodded and looked at the mural's horizon line. In the days that followed, Nebraska Air's reforms took root. Employees completed bias training. Customer complaint procedures were revamped. A whistleblower hotline was established. Naomi, a new HR director, oversaw the changes with Mia Sanchez at her side. Elijah's story was taught in schools across the city. Teachers used it to discuss empathy, justice, and resilience. Elijah returned to school with a new confidence. Friends lined up to greet him. His teacher asked him to present his architectural models to the class. He stood at the front, chalk in hand, explaining each design with poise. He ended with a smile and a simple message. "Build bridges, not walls." It was his new mantra. In private moments, Elijah still carried the memory of that flight, that moment when fear and prejudice almost broke him, but he also carried the memory of his father's unwavering support, Mia's courage, and the community's solidarity. He kept drawing bridges, and every stroke was a promise that injustice could be challenged, that truth could be defended, and that compassion could triumph over fear. Months passed in a soft blur of winter giving way to spring. Minneapolis thawed into gentle warmth. Streetlights reflected on puddles, buds unfurled into blossoms, and in a modest studio atop a community arts center, Elijah Reed sat at a drafting table, surrounded by foam core, rulers, and colored markers. His hair fell in front of his eyes as he drew a sweeping curve that connected two miniature building models. He paused and turned the page, revealing sketches of a sky bridge adorned with solar panels and living gardens. This was his final project for the Youth Innovation Summit in Chicago. It was the culmination of everything he had lived through, a bridge that defined more than architecture. It embodied connection, empathy, and the power to span divides. It was inspired by the painful events of Flight 218 and the solidarity that followed. A soft knock sounded at the door. Mia Sanchez entered, her badge replaced by a task force lapel pin. She carried 2 steaming mugs. "Coffee," she said with a grin. "You ready for the final presentation?" Elijah wiped his pencil lead from his fingers and smiled. "As ready as I'll ever be." They sat together at a small table by the window, sunlight spilling over Elijah's sketches. "I've never seen anything like this," Mia said, studying the bridge renderings. "It's not just a design, it's a statement." Elijah took a sip. "I want people to see that architecture can heal, that buildings can bring us together, not push us apart." Mia nodded. "You've done more than draw lines on paper. You've given people a vision." He looked back at his sketches and returned to work, adding shading to the living gardens, annotations about wind turbines integrated into the railings, notes on using reclaimed materials for sustainability. He imagined children playing under the arches, neighbors meeting halfway across the span, conversations sparked by shared spaces. A chime on his tablet interrupted him. A notification from the summit organizers' presentation in 1 hour. Elapsed time 3 weeks since the lawsuit verdict. Elijah closed the sketch pad and packed his tools. Mia helped him secure the models in a carrying case. Outside the studio, the city buzzed with preparation. Banners reading "Future Architects Everywhere" lined the halls. Volunteer guides and bright vests swept people from one room to another. The summit was in full swing. Downstairs, Malcolm Reed waited near the main entrance. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were laser-focused on the door. When Elijah and Mia appeared, he stood and waved. "Elijah," he said, opening his arms. Elijah ran forward and embraced his father. He felt a surge of gratitude. His dream was one speech away from becoming reality. But the thought of standing in front of so many people still made his heart flutter. "You look great," Malcolm said. "Nervous a little?" Elijah admitted. "You've faced far bigger crowds," Malcolm reminded him. "Just share your vision." Mia led the way through a corridor lined with awardees. Elijah noticed a few faces he recognized other young innovators whose projects addressed climate change, education, and urban planning. They gave him nods and thumbs-ups. At the main hall, rows of seats extended under a high ceiling. A stage spanned the front wall, backed by a giant screen displaying the summit logo and the title Building Bridges. Parents, educators, sponsors, and local officials filled the seats. Journalists waited in the aisles. Elijah's pulse quickened. He tightened his jacket lapel and gripped his notes. He spotted Dana Mulroney nowhere. He reminded himself she had no place in this new chapter. The host, a renowned architect named Simone Keller, welcomed everyone with a warm smile. "Welcome to the Youth Innovation Summit," she said. "Today, we witness the brightest young minds reimagine our world. First up is Elijah Reed, whose bridge design has captured hearts and headlines alike." Elijah took a deep breath as Simone led him on stage. He walked under the bright lights, feeling small but resolute. He faced the audience, cleared his throat, and began. "Good morning. My name is Elijah Reed. I am 9 years old, and I love to build." A ripple of applause followed. He smiled and continued. "Last year, I was on a flight to Chicago. I was accused of something I did not do. In that moment, it felt like the world had closed in on me. But I realized that if people would bridge the gaps between us, if we could build spaces that invite connection instead of division, maybe we could prevent others from feeling that isolation." He clicked a remote, and his bridge sketches filled the screen behind him. The audience leaned forward. "This is the Sky Bridge for Unity. It spans 2 community centers divided by a busy highway. Instead of seeing the other side as unreachable, people can walk above it, sharing the same path. The bridge features gardens nourished by rainwater, seating spaces for conversation, and solar glass panels to light the walkway at night." He clicked again, showing cross-section diagrams, material lists, and user scenarios, children racing across, elders walking with grandchildren, neighbors hosting pop-up art shows in the middle. The audience viewed every detail with hushed fascination. He took a breath and leaned into the mic. "Bridges are more than concrete and steel. They are promises. Promises that we see each other, that we hear each other, that we build together." The hall erupted into applause so thunderous it rattled the stage. Elijah stood still for a moment, absorbing the response. This was the moment he had dreamed of. Backstage, Malcolm and Mia watched on monitors. They clasped hands as the applause continued. Mia wiped a tear. Malcolm nodded, eyes bright. Elijah stepped forward to accept an award, a plaque engraved Youth Architect of the Year. He elevated it for all to see. "Thank you," he said simply. During the breakout session that followed, Elijah answered questions from reporters. He spoke about empathy, about how architecture could address social issues. He gave interviews about his ordeal on the plane and how it fueled his vision. One journalist asked, "What advice do you have for other kids who face prejudice?" Elijah looked directly at the camera. "Don't let fear build walls around you. Build bridges instead." His words spread across live feeds and social media. The hashtag #BuildBridges trended within hours. That afternoon, a local city council member invited Elijah to present his design at an upcoming municipal meeting, with the possibility of funding consortiums. Community organizers reached out to include his bridge concept in an urban renewal plan. Schools requested virtual presentations from him to inspire students nationwide. By evening, Elijah was exhausted but exhilarated. He sat in the green room with his sketch pad, drawing new ideas for bridge lighting and interactive art installations. Malcolm entered with 2 smoothies. "How do you think today went?" he asked, handing one to Elijah. Elijah smiled tiredly. "Better than I even hoped." Malcolm clinked his straw against Elijah's. To building bridges, they toasted, savoring the moment. As the summit wound down, Elijah walked outside with Mia and Malcolm along the Chicago River Walk. Streetlights glowed, boats drifted by, people strolled beneath trees. He looked up at the city skyline and imagined a network of sky bridges connecting rooftops across the horizon. Sweeping arcs of steel and glass bridging divides not only physical but social. He turned to Mia. "Thank you for believing in me." She shook her head, smiling. "I never doubted you." He saw a reflection of himself in the river light, small but bright. Malcolm placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You changed more than just the sky. You changed hearts." Elijah closed his eyes, letting the river breeze wash over him. In that moment, he felt the bridge inside himself. A bridge built of resilience, empathy, and hope. It would carry him forward through every challenge to come. And as the lights of the city danced on the water, Elijah Reed knew his journey was just beginning. His designs would not only shape cities, they would shape the way people see each other, because every bridge he built would be a reminder that, in the end, we are all connected. Elijah Reed's journey reminds us that even the smallest voice can shake the highest towers of prejudice. In the face of false accusations and mob mentality, he chose forgiveness and built something far greater than any wall ever erected. His story is an urgent call to confront our biases and champion compassion, because real change begins when we bridge the gaps between us. If Elijah's courage moved you, give this video a like. Share it with friends who believe in justice, and subscribe for more stories that celebrate empathy and hold hate to account. Until next time, remember, we're all architects of our shared humanity. Let's build it wisely.